Hello and welcome to the Blockchain and Us, where pioneers and thought leaders talk about their journey in blockchain technology, crypto assets, and the token economy. And I'm your host, Manuel Staggers. If you enjoy this podcast, please give it a top rating and review on iTunes, and feel free to follow me on Twitter at Manuel Staggers. This episode has support from Shift Crypto Security, the maker of Bitbox, a minimalist hardware wallet for cryptocurrencies. Bitbox is rock solid, compact, portable, easy to use, and designed and manufactured in Switzerland. To learn more and get your wallet today, visit www.shiftcrypto.ch. My guest today is Anish Mohammed. Anish has been in security and cryptography since the year 2000 as a researcher and consultant. He has worked for several financial institutions and is one of the founding members of the United Kingdom Digital Currency Association. He is on several advisory boards, including Hyperloop Transport Technologies, Privacy Shell, Collider X, Ripple Labs, and Chain of Things. And his main work today concentrates on security, scalability, and consensus of blockchains and smart contracts for the safety of artificial intelligence, cryptoeconomics, and token engineering. Anish is a regular speaker and the co-founder of Ethicsnet, and he's also the co-founder and CTO of Ontici and the head of research at the Information Sciences Institute at SRH Berlin. And now, to the interview. Hello, Anish, and thanks a lot for making time today.
Thank you for including me.
Anish, you've been working with cryptography for many years, and then all of a sudden, out of the blue, came the blockchain. How has that changed your work?
Well, I have to caveat that. So I kind of did active research probably 10 years ago for a period of time, and then I've been involved in research in security and crypto in a much lesser sense. But what had actually happened is I always had a lot of interest in privacy and security of payment systems. So my first paid job was building micropayment systems for Ericsson out of Stockholm. So, I was interested in the characteristics that paper money had given and some of the characteristics that were missing in all the other payment systems. And when, the so-called first Bitcoin paper came out, it slowly and steadily changed the world as it was. And I started reaching out to people and, around probably 5 years ago now, I got interested, started talking to people, and I got an advisory with Ripple and started working with them in addition to talking to a lot of other people about, various cryptocurrency initiatives and things of that sort.
I spoke recently with a professor at ETH in Switzerland, and he said, none of this is new, really. It's cryptography isn't new, decentralization isn't new. It's just at the way he put it together. That's kind of like a different approach. Do you agree with that as well?
Yeah, I agree with that. Because it's like in the broader sense, in the sense of consensus mechanisms, the proof of work consensus mechanism was already available for a few years now. But it's just the way that it's all being put together. That's a brilliance. It's a sheer brilliance. So, we've actually had hash functions. We had, public key cryptography. We had symmetric key cryptography. We have had elliptic curves for a while. All the key components in that sense were around. Mm-hmm. But, putting it, it's always interesting to say, things exist, but really, right, when things all come together and things really work, that's when real innovations happen, right? That's when reality kicks in. You could say internal combustion engines existed, propellers existed, wings and kites existed. But, in 1903, when Wright brothers actually put all those things together, made it happen, we have heavier than air flight. And from then on, the way we look at transport has changed significantly. The same happened to, when crypto systems emerged in the sense like Bitcoin protocol was published, and as a side effect, blockchain was produced, right? So we actually had the challenge of offline double spend, and we wanted to have a solution that actually fixed the problem of offline double spend.
Preventing double spend, is that
Yes.
is that the only thing that blockchain technology enabled that wasn't possible before?
No, it was just the start of it, right? It's like the first piece that actually really happened was preventing offline double spend. All the characteristics that it actually allowed people to, get as a, fringe benefit was already there. But the thing that improved a lot more was the introduction of smart contracts. So, in a way, if you think about innovations in the sense, introduction of blockchain allowed integrity, the ability to look at something across time. So there's a logical timestamp and public provenance and things of that sort. What was really allowed by smart contracts was this ability to actually attach policies to data. So, for example, if I were to say to you, imagine the scenario of Facebook where Facebook actually gave some of the data to Cambridge Analytica, right? So such a situation could have been, in theory, avoided if the data was attached to a smart contract. And the smart contract said, this data that I've given to Facebook will only be available to Facebook for doing ABC and shall not be available for anybody else under the conditions, right? So that was the real change in terms of, the big, the big innovations in that sense. So introduction of blockchain was a big innovation, and even more bigger innovation, given we have public authenticated data, was the innovation of smart contract. That really pushed the envelope really further afield.
Which projects or which of those specific areas that you just mentioned, these innovations, what have you been working on recently in that regard?
So for me, I am, loosely speaking, somebody who's in the larger Ethereum Swarm team. So Swarm is the file system part of Ethereum. So there are a couple of people. There's Victor, who actually is a lead person. Then there's Aaron, and then people like me who occasionally show ahead and have interest in some specific pieces. So I do some bits in the Ethereum space, more from a cryptoeconomic perspective. In the smart contract space, I have some interest in verification. So it's formal verification. Imagine that you actually say something and you write it down. The fact that you want to really verify what you said and what you wrote down are the same. Generally, we have ways of doing that. Imagine we do the same for smart contracts. So that's more or less described as formal methods. So essentially, what it does is like you structure your smart contract in such a way, and you apply some mathematics to actually make sure that the kind of whatever you've written down actually complies by a set of rules. So it kind of gives a lot more security. Imagine the challenge that DAO had crossed. Things like that would be reduced at least. That's what I'm trying to do in this space.
Mm-hmm. You also had, I think it was a presentation or a lecture about the tokenization of transport.
Yes, I have to admit, I've been thinking about it for a while. I was actually asked by one of the newer entrants in the transport space. It's almost like a year ago, to help them with tokenization of transport. Mm-hmm. I have had a spare time project on drones, and I've been thinking about how you could actually commercialize drones, and that led me to think about tokenized transport. So the way you do path discovery, just for listeners to understand this better. So imagine you have a city, and you actually want to go find routes in a city. The first set of people who actually find routes actually helps everybody else. So you need to actually incentivize them.
You mean routes in the air?
Yeah, routes in the air, yes. And this could be on the ground or any place for that matter, right? For the drones in that sense. So it's personalized drones, essentially. And then I was thinking about, how could you actually do this in a sense that it's pretty expensive to build things like that? How do you, make financing such projects much more easier? There's this trade-off between capex and opex. Capex being the capital expenditure, opex being the operational expenditure. Mm-hmm. And the opex lends itself very well to being tokenized. So you could actually, issue some tokens and forward sell the cost of actually or the overall value of the tickets for the next many years, and then you could actually offer each of the people who have actually bought this the right to actually go from point A to point B. So it could be like instead of one getting Uber, you could actually use an application that says, okay, I want to go from the place where I am right now in London to LA, I press a button and all the internal negotiations happen between all the transport providers. So the Uber would compete with Lyft to actually give me the best rates from me to the airport. And there are different ways by which this mode of transport could happen. You could have ports that, in the future. I'm just alluding to people that exist in the space because I don't want to name names. So, the port could actually appear at my doorstep. I get into the port takes me to the airport. The ports get loads onto an aircraft, and it actually goes all the way from here to the endpoint where, or I could switch airports, planes in that sense, and get to the other end, and then the ports get delivered to the end destination. And for all this, I'll be charged in tokens. And doing that is very doable even now. It's just that you require a bunch of negotiations that would happen between the set of transport providers, so the price discovery can happen. And once that's happened, you can actually have much more efficient, mechanisms of transport. And at various places, it could actually help providing transport, because effectively, if you were to think about a project, initializing a project is much more harder than actually anything else. You actually need to have money to do all the bureaucracy that's required to bootstrap a project. And in this instance, a lot of countries and lots of the parts of the world, that amount of money doesn't exist. And if you were to be able to tokenize this transport and able to raise money and use this to actually do some of these things, it might be very well possible to do more and more areas transport at the same time, have seamless transport, and which is optimized in many ways, not just path discovery, but also for, the price. So the cost of transport per unit distance could probably come down and could be accessible to a lot more people.
Mm-hmm. And why exactly do you need to tokenize this whole ecosystem there? Because, you said before, it's price discovery, it's negotiation, it's also financing of the whole infrastructure.
Yes.
But there are already ways to organize all that, right, without tokens. So why exactly would you need tokens for that?
So let me try explain this backwards. So imagine you actually want to do a project right now, day one, right? So there are projects that are happening in different parts of the world. Generally, the time it takes for you to actually from start to finish, like 5 years or something like that. And generally speaking, a lot of the projects really struggle even to get the money required to do the initial study phase. So that will be a real challenge.
So seed capital, venture capital.
Seed capital to just start it, right? And then there's a question of the amount of money that's required to build infrastructure. So it's like even if the government or the financing body that actually underwrites the cost of transport is willing to give you some amount of money, or the operational cost will still be a very large sum that's pretty hard to raise, right? And then there's all the challenges of actually finding the right price and looking for inflation. Say, for example, in the UK, how do you find the right price for the train tickets? And there's a whole amount of debate that already happens. Those kind of challenges will be solved straight away if you tokenize it.
But how? How exactly?
Imagine that you actually were to tokenize transport in and around London for the tickets, right? So literally, it's a question of supply versus demand. It's very transparent. So there is no arbitrary, pushing up of the prices. The prices will be found out by a marketplace in that sense.
And they always change.
They always change, yes. And it is assuming efficient markets, it's very likely you will have far more cheaper transport and more efficient price discovery rather than regulatory ways of finding it where, in a sense, like customers don't have lobbying power. Let's put it that way, right? The people who have the power to push prices up or down most likely have corporates in that sense. And the choices that are left to customers are kind of limited. If it's tokenized, it's a very open ecosystem where you have all the people who actually travel an opportunity to vote with their feet on the price of things. So that will actually help. discovered.
And so basically, just so I understand it a little bit better, you said before, there's also an integration of existing providers. Let's say you have Lyft, you have Uber, you have certain airlines, you have maybe other things as well, right? A valet service or, whatever. And so there would be somebody who says, you know what, I can organize this much more efficiently than having to say I have to take a yellow cab and then I have to take United and fly here. So I can take the cheapest offerings that exist in the market and pay everything on a pre-negotiated contract that is actually a smart contract that people pay for with a token. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Let's say I had this idea, or you and me together have this idea. So we would then write this down, write a white paper and make an ICO to sell these tokens?
Not necessarily we have to do an ICO. This is like the first and foremost thing that we need to do is essentially get an agreement for pricing with the largest set of people, at the very least, to get an idea of where we are, right? And once that's there, you could decide to actually have a token, the TGE, a token generation event, raise enough money to do this. I mean, the thing I was also about to say was you could do this with so-called securitized tokens as well. So because the thing you can understand is like you are going to have an infrastructure that's underneath it. So if you really wanted to, you could offer that as a tokenized asset. So there are multiple ways to actually raise money for this, because now you've already got like a bunch of licenses, at least first in place, to allow people to transport human beings or cargo in this particular set paths. That by itself is of value. That has to be, kind of agreed to before you go ahead and buy, do token generation event, because otherwise the challenge is like, if you don't get those licenses, it could be a huge challenge, even after you have the money, right? So once you have that, then you can go ahead and say, okay, you know what, we actually got this, licenses in place, agreements in place. Now we're going to do this, and this is what we think we are going to do. This is how we're going to do this. And then the very least, you could actually issue a first set of tokens to allow people to access some transport, at least in the localist area. That will be the test, right? And then on, you can actually continue to onboard more and more people. And I from what I gather, there are a lot of people who are interested in this. I won't be surprised if Uber or Lyft is actually thinking about tokenization of transport, because that actually helps them to do that. And the thing we need to understand also is the fact that the way the direction technology is taking us. So autonomous vehicles are coming in, and this is part of the reason I've been thinking about it, about drones and using personalized transport. It was an abstract thought experiment of myself for like 5 years ago. But that's where I, started thinking about tokenization of transport. And what I can say is, when autonomous transport kicks in, a lot of the things that are currently existing would disappear. And the new economy would very much be aligned with actually having a tokenized transport. Essentially what that means is, the assets are not owned by anybody, and the corporates or the entities that actually run it will be keen to actually have monetization of unitary value of transport in that sense. So they can have the optimal value for every resource they have and get the best out of it. And in that sense, it also gives everybody transparency. So if they get challenged for things, they can actually prove to people, how this happened and why they did something and how their pricing happens, and all the things that they might get challenged in the future. They have much better answers to give than arbitrary, what we decided that's the case kind of thing.
Fascinating. Most of the public transport is controlled by governments currently, right?
Yes.
You mentioned before Lyft and Uber, it's the absolute exception, right? That is even possible, and has only been possible for a few years. But how does the public sector benefit from tokenizing transport?
So think of it this way, right? Imagine you are in a country where the capital efficiencies are not that great. So imagine you are in a developing country, and the developing country actually has some amount of resources, but doesn't have the amount of resources required to provide the kind of transport system that's required for the population of the country. The thing then that would happen is like, you could probably initiate a project, and it's pretty unlikely it will get to a stage where the project will be completed because lack of finances. But if the market believes that there's a promise for that part of the world to actually evolve, or if that part of the world actually ties up with other parts of the world which already has demonstrated that the tokenization could work, then raising of the capital for them will be pretty straightforward and pretty easy. So, in that sense, there will be an averaging in that sense that's happened, right? What literally one needs to understand is there's always a network effect. So as more and more people enter into any ecosystem, the chances that you find paths that connect point A to point B increases. So that also forces entities who actually run systems to actually open up their services into new areas, right? Think of the EasyJet kind of thing, right? Mm-hmm. When EasyJet or other people who are like flying very cheap flights, they only flew a very selected zones, and slowly and steadily they spread across because of the network effect of the economy. So the same thing will apply. So it's like when somebody starts tokenizing something, and then they will recognize that there's this opportunity there where they could actually do this for a developing country or a developed country where the services are not as brilliant as as you would expect, and the condition of transport for most of the people living in all those regions would improve. That's my thesis. I mean, going by what I've discovered from the data that's publicly available on all this cheap transport, cheap air transport mechanisms that are available, I think a similar pattern will emerge. That's my belief. But again, I am not a transport economist. I'm just looking at the data that's publicly available.
You mentioned before developing countries. And tokenizing transport there, makes perfect sense, like you just said, right? To raise additional funding or have security for completion of projects. But what about developed countries?
The developed countries already have a very different problem. The problem is misaligned incentives to service providers in different layers. Mm-hmm. So say, for example, in the UK, think about it. Network Rail actually subsidizes the underlying ecosystem for everybody else to operate on top of it, right? So in an arbitrary thought experiment, we could actually think about it. To take an arbitrary rail, say the Southwest or whatever it is, right? If we were to tokenize that and offer the services, we might find that it might be far more efficient than what is running right now. So that is very possible. Because what effectively is happening in the UK is Network Rail is actually what I describe as a company that is being subsidized by the taxpayer. So effectively, it underwrites the infrastructure cost. And actually, what is happening is everybody else who runs rails on top of it is providing a service and getting profits out of it. So it's like that's the misaligned incentives. If it was tokenized, what can happen is whatever be the alignment of incentives will be fairly shared between the set of all people in that sense, right? So if you hold the tokens and you recognize that the price of transport has gone up, then you also get some value out of it, rather than just the corporate that actually holds this particular service, right? So in that sense, it could be useful for the population in the country to actually do that, and they also have the ability to decide what to do in that sense. They could ensure that voting with their feet in that sense, and kind of make sure that the prices are in the right ballpark, because it's a market economy in operation, whereas none of that actually works. Price doesn't seem to come down in the UK. It's always been going up. And if you look at prices between Berlin and prices in the UK, price for a month of all zones in Berlin is I think 81, 83 euros, right? And if you want to have a zone 1 to 6 that's for a month, okay? It's for a week in London, 1 to 6 is probably closer to £100.
Wow.
See, can you imagine what is the reasoning behind that and where the money goes? I don't know. I really don't know.
Well, they'll say the salaries are much higher in the UK and things like this.
No, it's not actually true. If you could actually look at the numbers and prove that that's actually not true.
Yeah.
The average wage of any of the drivers or the average employee in the TfL is not much higher than the average employee in working in Berlin, I would say. But the difference, the quality of life is not that different.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah, so it's like there's something magical that's happening somewhere. We are not understanding it. And providing transparency to that so that everybody understands what the hell is going on will be a very interesting exercise, at least.
Yes. I mean, you mentioned you're very much focusing on cryptoeconomics as well. And
that's one of the things I'm interested in. Yes.
Yes. So, and you engineer tokens that take advantage of mechanisms of cryptoeconomics. So, how exactly do you go about developing and engineering such tokens?
Okay, so I have to admit upfront that this is an emerging field, and it's like a lot of us have actually tried doing this, and we collaborate. So I collaborate quite a bit with Trent McConaughey, who actually is the CTO of BigchainDB, and he's now running the Ocean protocol. So I helped him a bit with the Ocean protocol. So for me, I have a bunch of mechanisms that I apply. So, in general, I try to isolate games that are happening in that ecosystem. I simplify an ecosystem to the simplest possible form it could exist on its own. And then I would look at the set of all actors and understand their incentives and what their security margin or their margin is, and then see what could be the interaction between all the players in that game, and see if I can optimize it, and can I actually construct a protocol that actually will give the best results for the ecosystem as a whole and be stable. That's more or less what I try to do in simplistic sense. And I iterate it multiple times, and sometimes do simulations. Any tools that could be used, I normally use. So that's how we do it.
Mm-hmm. Which blockchains do you use for this?
No, the thing is, like, blockchains have nothing to do with this in that sense, right? So it's like, in general, tokens are ERC-21s, but that's on an Ethereum blockchain, if I were to put it that way. But the behavior of tokens as such has nothing to do with the underlying blockchain, except for the fact that I should probably put my hand up and say some caveats to it. So there are costs for using logic on a blockchain. So if you were to do any smart contracts, each of the smart contracts would have instructions, and each of the instructions would have a so-called gas value that you need to give to actually have this instruction executed in that sense. So there's value for that, and then there's also the time it takes for things to get propagated on a block, or confirmed on a block. So both of them actually have some interesting impact or side effects. So one of them being that if you actually want to have small values and you have very fast price discovery, what can actually happen is that could be difficult on a blockchain that's not doing really fast and not really finding the price discovery really fast enough.
Okay. How many people are working in this field?
I honestly don't know. Going back, I started getting into this phase like March last year. Okay, so at that point in time, I hardly knew. So there was like Vlad and the rest of the guys from Ethereum who were talking about it, and then very few people were actively doing anything. Then when me and Trent first started talking about it, it was in October. So I met Trent in World AI Summit, and he was actually working on the Ocean protocol initial version, and we talked about it. And at that point in time, I had already done more than probably 10 protocols. So I, as usual, offered my hand in trying to help him out, and we spent a couple of hours doing a bit of the work and going through the adversarial models and looking at. I always come from the cryptoeconomics from a very crypto angle rather than an economics angle. And I kind of use some bits of game theory, but mostly I'm very crypto leaning in that sense. What I mean by that, like my thinking is always about security margins and incentives in a crypto sense. So essentially, my view of the cryptoeconomics is a colored glass that's colored by cryptography or cryptology in that sense. So, if somebody were to turn in and come in from the other side with an economics class, that could be slightly different. Mm-hmm. But it has to meet somewhere in the middle. So a lot of the people I knew were people from very much from a crypto space. I know one person who's in Berlin, Olivier. He actually is an economist, and he's now a crypto economist. And I actually work with him in my startup. So He is the only PhD economist who's done game theory who is significantly into cryptoeconomics that I know of. So it's a very small subset of people. So a lot of people are interested. I haven't seen large amount of work being done. A lot of theories are being put forward. Some of the theories that are being put forward make some assumptions which are pretty, illogical if you were to think about it in that sense. So the reason I say that in most of the ecosystem, there's a leakage where a token that's being issued is actually being used as an investment instrument, and people hold on to it. If they hold on to it, then that actually takes away all the characteristics that you really want for that ecosystem to work properly in that sense. So
the reason also I asked how many people work in this token engineering space is because I remember a conversation with you where you said that the crypto space has the problem that very few people understand the very specific problems.
Yeah, so what I was kind of describing is the situation of convergence that happens in blockchain. So say for example, imagine you actually wanted to do I have a bunch of pet hobbies, and as I was talking, Trent also. The reason why me and Trent get along really well is we share a lot of pet hobbies. One of my pet hobbies is ethics of AI. I happen to be the co-founder of Ethicsnet along with a classmate of mine from Singularity University. Mm-hmm. So we've been working in this space for a while. So imagine you actually want to tokenize AI to actually have the right kind of behavior. So what that implies is you need to have a fair understanding of AI, ethics of AI, then a fair understanding of blockchain, fair understanding of game theory in that sense, and smart contracts, and so on and so forth. Right. So it's a product of probabilities, right? Imagine you had to find somebody and the chance that they would know something is always a small fraction, right? So when you want multiple skills, the product of probabilities decreases. When probabilities are normally multiplied, the probabilities only go down, not up, right? So it's becoming smaller and smaller. So if you want expertise in 5 or 6 areas, the set of people that you actually have will be very tiny, and that is kind of not very good. So that's what I was referring to in that sense.
What is the result of that?
The result of that is the diversity that you might actually want in intellectual thought is kind of constrained. So mostly if you were to think about things, you always have a similar kind of characteristic that you would see. More male dominant, the people who have actually done crypto and math and things like that. And a lot of the things that you probably, I would put my hand up and say, I probably don't have all the soft skills that's required to think about things the way it should be thought about. So I probably think that might be true about a lot of my friends who are involved in token engineering. So, that could be a problem. In the long run, you recognize this, and via hindsight, I go, all the guys who are involved in doing this didn't understand this. Yes, so we actually need to have more broader engineering consensus where we could actually discuss things that are in a much more broader sense. In fact, there was, Sherman, she's based out of Berlin. She runs, I think she actually has a academic position in University of Vienna in cryptoeconomics, and we've had, at least 2 sets of meetings with her where we were, talking about this. And we all recognize the challenge that, a set of people that are currently involved probably don't have the right skill set, probably, or maybe could be just skewed, right? So that's the challenge. It's the smaller the sample, the representation goes down significantly. And, if you are going to, make policies for, not policies, tokenization for things that have a broader impact on larger sets of humanity, I think it will be fair to actually have, more and more people who are similar to the people who are going to be affected by this, right?
But the issue there is that they won't understand what the problems are at hand.
Yes, that's the problem. Yes, so it's like the governance process that's happening right now, in the sense an average person on the street doesn't have the ability to influence governmental decision making in that sense. But at the same time, at least there is this threat of being voted out at least once in many years. But even that doesn't exist in this kind of a protocol sense. When the protocol is kind of engineered and let out, it stays there. You were just describing Bitcoin, and the challenge of Bitcoin is more or less there forever until it dies out. It never dies out. It never dies out. So, the design of that, if it was done by one person or 10 people, the 10 people, their understanding of the world could be very different from an average person on the street. And that becomes a reality. So, I don't know.
Let's take a quick break for a message from our sponsors. Shift Crypto Security is the maker of Bitbox, a minimalist hardware wallet for cryptocurrencies. Storing your digital assets safely should be a priority, but software and phone wallets can't protect your assets from hackers and malware. The Bitbox can. Developed by a team of experts who combine Swiss pioneering spirit with a strong commitment to crypto security performance that is second to none, the Bitbox is rock solid, compact, portable, easy to use, and designed and manufactured in Switzerland. To learn more and get your wallet today, visit www.shiftcrypto.ch. We talked before a little bit about, you had just come back from New York, from the Consensus Conference, and you said you've noted some changes there in comparison to previous years. Also, you think it's more a skew maybe towards projects that have heavy marketing.
Yeah, that's one of the things that's becoming more and more prominent in that sense. You could actually see, people trying to get airtime for projects that probably have similar amount of innovation to other projects, but getting a lot more visibility because they spend a lot more money on marketing. Marketing is emerging as a very, very important tool in helping projects, get visibility.
Mm-hmm. Is that bad?
I don't know. The honest answer depends on the decisions that's being made. So if marketing is being economic with truth and saying things that actually doesn't exist, then it could pretty much be bad, right? It's actually, fooling people in that sense, right? But if marketing is telling the truth and making it understandable by people, so, things are accessible to people, could be good. So you have more and more people who understand what it is. So I don't know what marketing really does in the sense. It's like if marketing is being economic with truth and having, colored views of things and, making biased opinions, probably it's bad. But if it's actually doing the right thing, which is essentially making things accessible to people, helping people to understand what's going on, helping people to make decisions based on information and data, and remove the nuances of emotions and human decision biases. That's a very, very good thing to do. But unfortunately, there are very few of those happening.
Mm-hmm. You think more an education angle, maybe?
Yes.
Right. And less driving product and driving adoption.
Absolutely.
Anish, how did you get into working in technology?
So technology, that's kind of a long story. I'll summarize the story. So I went to med school. My first degree is in medicine. I was born in some place called Kerala in India. So my parents actually wanted me to go to med school. So as a very, well-behaved child, let me put it that way. My parents might question that one, but I agreed to go to med school. But I was always interested in technology and math and crypto. So when I was in med school, I used to teach the people in engineering school crypto security, some bits of computer science and data signal processing. So when I was helping different sets of people, it was helping them with crypto libraries and things of that sort. At one point in time, when I finished my house residency, which is a residency that you have to do, there was this piece of work that I was doing for somebody, and I said to him, look, you need to actually start paying me so I can do this full time. And that's how I got a so-called quasi-paid job. But my real paid job, in that sense, outside of research labs, was Ericsson to build the payment system. So with a degree in medicine, I ended up being part of the security team for Ericsson, building a micropayment system in Stockholm.
Mm-hmm. What fascinated you about cryptography?
It is it's a funny story. My dad used to subscribe to an Indian magazine called Science Today. So this is like a magazine that my dad used to read and I used to read after him. So there was one article. This is going back probably 30 plus years ago. There was this article about cryptography, and this Martin Gardner had this challenge for RSA 129. I read this challenge and I went, you know what? It can't be that hard. I need to understand. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So yes, that's the stupidity that got me into this thing. So, I read it. I looked at the RSA 129 and said, yeah, it's factoring problem. How hard can that be to factor this? And I started reading all the things, and then, you get hooked. You have a very interesting puzzle that a lot of people are interested in solving, and then I got more and more involved in it. And in around 96, there was like Bruce Nye actually published his, Applied Cryptography book. So I managed to actually get hold of a copy. So as I was saying, there was somebody who was actually asking me to help him with writing his crypto library. So I offered him this incentive. You get me a photocopy of this book, because getting hold of a copy of a book was pretty hard. So you get me a copy of the book, I'll help you with writing some primitives. So there you go. That's how I got into this whole mess.
And the rest is history.
The rest, I don't know if it's history or not. It's like every time technology comes along, I have to admit, I'm always curious about technology. This is probably the third or the fourth, kind of revolution or whatever you call in technology. So when the cloud thing came along in 2007, I got involved. I got involved in writing the early thought leadership. So I co-authored the Cloud Bias Decision Guide, the Cloud Security Alliance Guide version 2.1, TCI, moving to the cloud. Then when I was in Accenture, I helped them create the Cloud Strategy School. Mm-hmm. And for a while was responsible for cloud security in Accenture. And then I sat on the ISO committee. That was that one. And then when the drones came along, I got involved with DIY drones. I was on the other crypto dev list, was a moderator there, and I ended up becoming friends with Chris Anderson, who now runs 3D Robotics. He was the editor-in-chief of Wired magazine. Then when AI became very, big and prominent in the big data space, I got involved as well. And, I have this project in ethics of AI that I've been working on. Last year, we had a submission to the X Prize for AI, and also got a prize from the Dutch Royal Society for the best data science project.
Wow.
And for the last 5 years, as I described, I've been involved in blockchain. There you go. So I generally dabble in things, and when intersections happen, everything lands upon my plate, and I go, wow, I'm going to try help people a bit.
You're in London currently, right?
Yeah, I'm mostly based.
How important is location?
I honestly don't know, because it's like in the last year and a half since I left my day job, I've been mostly on a plane, and I'm traveling around quite a bit. Mm-hmm. So, I am lucky enough to be at the places where I need to be. So, say, for example, as I was saying, last 2 weeks, I've been Berlin, Paris, Berlin, Slovenia, London, New York, I don't know. So this is like wherever I need to be, I could be. So when there is like a Ethereum conference or a crypto conference that I need to be. So for example, there is supposed to be a conference day after tomorrow. I can't make it in Toronto, but I'm supposed to talk about the intersection of AI and blockchain, an ACM conference, because I still don't have a visa to get there, so I won't be able to make it. So that's my challenge. It's like my challenge is essentially more like if I need to go somewhere, if I don't get a visa in time, I can't make it. But a lot of people don't have that challenge, and for them, that's not a big deal. But I think, in any ecosystem where it's starting out, one of the key challenges you have is the fact that the people that are there are people that are known to you, and, relationships really matter. So it might be quite useful to see people in person. So that's my theory, but I don't know, I am just one person, making observations on things that are happening.
So it's very important for you to meet face to face instead of just being on a Slack channel or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, at least the initial conversation has to be face to face. So most of the key projects, I know the people, face to face, and I've talked to them, spent a good few hours talking to them, because one of the things that we need to understand is like the nuances of human communication is not really represented in a text channel, right? So emotions that actually being micro expressions that being expressed on the face is not really expressed in text, not at all expressed in text, let alone in telephonic conversation or audio conversation like we are having right now. So it's a pretty hard thing to gauge some things. Because what you're trying to do is build trust. If you want to work with somebody on a long period on a particular project, what you want is, the question essentially is, can I trust this person? Because the investment that you're going to make is your time, right? Time and your expertise. So you're going to invest your time and your expertise in a project, and you're trusting a person to do the right thing. So you want to make a judgment call based on what you know. So, yeah.
How do you evaluate the projects or the people that you work with?
I have very, very simple model for evaluation. Firstly, I really don't work with people I don't know unless they come referred to me by somebody I trust. So, generally speaking, almost all the projects I work with are brought to me by my friends. So I don't actually do any kind of marketing in any sense, way or shape or form. So if a project wants my help, somebody I know who I trust or worked with in the past points them at me and then says, I know this person for X number of years. He's a very good guy or a girl, and he or she has the right incentive. And then I meet them face to face if we can, sit down with them, and then I talk to them. And I ask them lots of stupid questions, and I give them a lot of feedback, and I see how they respond to feedback. I want to be, super sure that they're willing to take very blunt feedback. I wouldn't call diplomacy to be my core skill. So if I think something is not working, I tell them it's not working, and some people find it difficult to work with. So in a world where we don't have much time, as the ecosystem is growing at a rate where there's no time to sit around and fluff around and tell small lies to convince other people not to get upset, I believe that the time is so short. We actually need to take reality as it is and be willing and capable of accepting those things and making the changes so we can actually do the end result, deliver the end result. So I really value people who have integrity and have actually shown that they have they wouldn't be swayed by any changes in economy or other things, because that's, to me, super important. Because what generally happens throughout the process of the project, people who are working with you will actually become very, very, very rich. So, say, for example, if you think about people I've advised, say the Ripple Labs, right? So I've known them like 5 years. Through the past 5 years, the number of zeros that could be added to their value could have been more than 5. And there you go. That should tell you something. So my relationship with most of them hasn't changed at all. So, that's what I'm looking for. I really don't care about what your value in terms of number of zeros behind you is. But as a person, how you behave, what your value systems are, and, your drive to change the world in a positive direction. That really matters for me.
So currently you're also working on a startup, right?
Yes, I'm working on a startup. So the startup is essentially looking at securitized token that uses proofs, zero knowledge proofs. So that's what it does. So imagine if you want to monetize business processes that are dependent on data. This would be the easiest and the most secure way to do that. So that's what we are trying to do.
What is one of the maybe needs in the market that your startup could fill?
This simply put, quite a few in that sense. This is as I was describing the question of secondary markets, right? So, if you actually had a secondary market and you wanted to have liquidity, kind of liquidity in the current scenario is kind of limited. Say you think about bonds. How do you have a secondary liquidity for bonds? Or as I was describing the other one, which was like if you are a late stage venture and you want to raise some money, how do you actually do that? So that's another one. And then another thing that I was kind of about to say was the current set of tokens not being efficient in doing what we should be able to do to issue securities. So if you want to do security issuance, you have like multiple coins that you need to use, right? So you will have to use, you will have a bit of gas, because if you're going to do anything on Ethereum, you need gas. you could have a KYC coin, you could have a liquidity coin, a custody coin, and so many of those things. So in general, what you're kind of saying is like investors should be exposed to like second layer coins and liquidity for just buying investment in a security token. So that is kind of being taken care of by our startup.
How far along are you? I mean, how far or when can there be a solution in the market that you are creating?
Yeah, I mean, we are pretty confident that by Q1, Q2 next year, we should have a product in the market in that sense. At least, the way I would describe it is like when you want to do origination, okay? So origination of a loan, essentially, if you look at the overall cost involved, I mean, just to describe the whole process so that I can go back and describe why I say this way. So there's a legal cost, there's an arranger, and then there's a rating agency, then there's auditing, and then there's SPV, special purpose vehicles. And if you add all the cost of all those things, and each of them has a cost. So that's 1 to 2 million set of cost and 15 to 20 BPS for raising funds, right? So if you put it all together, that's like, if you are raising money less than 500 mil, it doesn't make it any efficient. So what we are trying to do is help people do that. So we need to actually have partners who would be involved in issuing this kind of financial instruments and bringing in all the efficiencies and providing the proofs for people to actually validate. That's what we're hoping to do.
Okay, cool. Is it your first startup, Anish?
In theory, yes. So I've helped a lot of people with lots of startups, but on my own, yes, this is my first startup.
Okay. Do you find it very different from the work you've done before, or what are your main, observations there in your own venture?
The main observation is the fact that because this is not an ICO venture, it's finding it harder to actually raise the capital. So, if this was an ICO and if there was tokens being issued, probably we wouldn't have the difficulty in having the amount of money compared to what is being raised is very, very small. And given the quality of team, we actually have people who've actually done this thing before. It's like proven people. And as I said, we also have a cryptoeconomist. So almost all the people in the team, my co-founder actually has worked as a VP products for us in a startup. So everybody has proven expertise in doing what they need to do. And even after that, we are finding it a challenge to actually raise capital, right? So that is kind of a bit of an oxymoron for me, in a sense like, everybody is willing to pay me to do things. If I aggregate my time, just my time alone, for at least a year plus, the money I need to raise for my startup is less than that, right? So it's like I'm wondering, if me plus 6 other people are going to join a startup, and you are putting in this small amount of money, it should be pretty much, a no-brainer to actually put that money in. But it could be that the market is very different. The money they're willing to pay me for doing things probably have higher short-term return on investment. And the thing I also would describe is like, if we were to have a market for data, one of the protocols that will really allow market for data would be the protocol that we are working on. Essentially, we would allow price discovery of data without actually revealing the data set. So that's like a super interesting construct. And you can actually have real data exchanges working.
Yeah, cool. Interesting. I'm wondering, I mean, you have your own project, and I mean, of course, you're making sure that you can deliver something that's of value. But if we look back a little bit to 2017, I mean, there was this huge spotlight on the whole cryptocurrency and blockchain technology ecosystem, and it has since cooled off a little bit also because many people say, well, will these companies ever deliver what they promised? How do you think companies in this whole blockchain ecosystem can make sure that they can actually build the things they promise?
That's a pretty hard one. The first and foremost thing I generally describe when I give talks about, generally cryptoeconomics and startups to people, I describe the challenge, right? The first thing I say is like, you have this normal curve, the curve that starts off with, friends and family, then seed round, Series A, Series B, Series C, Series D, E, and F. F is the F in that sense, right? So ICOs just allow people to go from seed stage to Series F, right? So the filtering that actually happens in each of the stages disappears, right? So one needs to understand that even with the best intentions, the filtering mechanism. So imagine at each of the filtering mechanisms, there's 1 out of 10 going through, right? So seed 1, Series A, 2, Series B, you do that. And so it gives you the filtering. Like if it's 4 stages, 10 to the power 4, 10 to the minus 4, right? 1 in 10,000 in that sense.
Filtering by the investor, right? By who are professionals and who will really X-ray the whole team and everything.
Absolutely. And that is totally missing. So unless the so-called, the team is going to be that due diligent and be so meticulous and be very, very, meticulous in making sure they make the right decisions and stick to it like anything before, it is pretty hard to do that. Your own human decision biases is pretty hard to fix. It's easier to fool yourself than anybody else. So I think it's pretty hard. And if firstly, what I would say is like, if you pick on problems that are real, that actually have real utility and people will really go and use them, and you're able to deliver that in a way that people can consume it, then I think there is a much higher chance that you could actually go and deliver a successful project. Because otherwise, what will happen is you might end up delivering a project, there will be no adoption. Even if they were the best technology in the world, if there's no adoption, then what you have done might not be of much value.
Right. In your own startup, how do you approach this? I mean, how do you make sure that you're on course with your mission?
So the first thing is, like, as I was describing, we have external partners in that sense. So for the protocol to really work, the actors in the current ecosystem have to be part of this, process. So if we don't deliver, they have risk and they will just, ask us to go do something else, climb trees maybe. So So, that's a very simple stigma. We actually have people who are in the ecosystem, say, late-stage venture capitalists, other SaaS companies that are interested in raising funds. All of those people who really have use of this protocol and actually think there's benefit for this, working with us, that's a very simple one. They will just go, we don't think that you're actually going to do what we want from you right now. So go away now. That will be the summary statement. I mean, they won't waste their time. I don't think.
But it's missing with most ICOs.
Yeah, it's pretty hard to build that in, right? It's pretty hard. So
what do you think will happen to most of these projects?
I think 1 to 2% of the projects would actually have anything that's actually running in probably 24 to 36 months. I would say even 24 months. So there was some data that was published that actually said 46% of all ICO projects that raise funds didn't actually deliver anything.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it certainly doesn't do the space a service that all of that happened. Yeah. What do you think we're currently maybe overestimating about what crypto assets and blockchain technology can do?
Oh, that's a very, very difficult thing. Overestimating, I honestly don't know. I mean, the thing is, like, the general observation I would say is, like, a lot of the use cases we actually have really don't need blockchain. So that's kind of a challenge, right? So if you were to think about any project and you go, how would this project work, and what does it really require? It is possible that you might figure out that you really don't need the possibility of having a blockchain. So in that sense, that could be the thing that we all should be thinking about. If that's not true, right, and we end up with all these things, it is very possible that there's an inflated expectation from people.
Next to that, to maybe a shakeout, or you said it before, 98% potentially of projects failing. What else do you think is on the horizon in the next few years?
So, firstly, if you were to think about it from a very token perspective and a blockchain perspective and a whole ecosystem perspective, in a token perspective, pretty much all of those tokens that are currently there, which are utility and non-utility, there will be more and more maturation that's happening. A lot of the tokens that are not delivering will die out. At the same time, there will be introduction of securitized tokens. That you can already see the harbors, the polymaths, and people like that are trying to do that. So I think that will have a lot more momentum, and going into the 6 to 12 months time, we will have a lot more of that. And going beyond that, at the same time, the blockchain ecosystem will have significant improvement in throughput, significant improvement in efficiencies. And as I was saying, all the people that I saw the other day, the guys from Plasma, the guys from Ethereum, and everybody else, and Cosmos guys, all of them working together will actually have like a better improvement of current cohort of blockchains with high performant blockchains that will solve some of the challenges we are possibly having right now. So it could be a different cohort of blockchains that are existing in 2 years from now, and similarly a different cohort of protocols that are existing 2 years from now. Similarly, token wise, the characteristics of the token that we actually have might be very different as well.
Mm-hmm. Do you think blockchain technology will still be around in 2025?
I am pretty sure it will be there, because think about it this way, right? Electricity as a technology, we don't consider that as a technology right now, right? It's like we take this as for granted. Similarly, if innovation happens and things go really, really well, it will be something that we take for granted. So cloud right now, a lot of people don't really consider cloud as cloud, because you have iCloud and uCloud and xCloud. You know what I mean? So in 2007, if you said cloud, everybody would ask, what the hell is a cloud, right? So there you go. So, 10 years time, things might change in life. People might think of things differently.
Yeah, I thought it was really important to also ask about how you got into this, because it's also a lot about learning. And so,
sure. I mean, for me, it was not jumping in per se. It was a slow slide into calamity. That sense. So, I've been involved in doing payment systems. I've been involved in doing research in crypto. So my involvement in payment systems goes back 19 years. I was like building my payment systems and e-payments as such. So, I was very aware of the developments for a very long time. Then I went and did some research and proper crypto in research labs and did masters and things like that. So, and then I got back into the normal day jobs world, and then I was doing a day job. And then again, I always used to keep track of developments in the crypto world in Secure.crypt and the cryptography mailing list. And when that thread happened in the cryptography mailing list, it got me started. And at first I was involved in helping a couple of people. I don't know if you know Amit Taki. So a couple of people like him in running a workshop on mining in Hackerspace in London, like donkeys years ago. And then I was very much interested in finding a proper job in the blockchain ecosystem. So I tried to reach out to the Ripple guys, and they already had found a CTO, Stefan. So he liked me, so he asked me to be an advisor. That's how I ended up being an advisor in Ripple at that point in time. And then I came back to UK. I decided we should set up a digital currency association in the UK. So I'm one of the founding members of UK Digital Currency Association. And then when Ethereum happened, I got a couple of my friends. You already mentioned Vinay. I know Vinay previous to Ethereum. And similarly, Victor previous to Ethereum. So they all got dragged in, and then, that implied that I talked to them. And, it's this general situation where your friends are working on interesting projects, you get curious about it, and you start working on them. And, over time, I've gotten drawn more and more into it. And at some point in last year, I left my day job and have been doing full-time all these things. And in some way in between the last 20 years, I've been really interested in this concept called zero-knowledge proofs. I had this handle for zero-knowledge for more than 20 years because I really like the concept of zero-knowledge. Because there are three characteristics which are so unique, I really like. If the real world worked according to that, the world would have been a very different place. First thing is a very simple one. Imagine I wanted to prove to you something. Imagine I said to you that I had the magical ability to get out of a room with one door. So I am the person who's actually trying to prove, and you are the verifier. I ask you to stand at the door with one, so the room with one door. I walk in through the door, you close the door behind me, and then you see me outside. And you know that I have the ability to get out of the room without using the door. And we could do that as many times as you want, but you would never find out how I do it. That's zero knowledge. Before and after the test has been done, you have gained no more knowledge than you knew before. Right? That's one. The second thing is, like, I can only, as a proof between the prover and the verifier, I can only prove to you that, I can do it if I were telling the truth, right? I can only convince the verifier if the prover is actually telling the truth. And the other part of the story is, and this is the more powerful part of the story, is as long as I'm telling the truth, you will be convinced. And imagine in the real world, if these three qualities were true, at least the last two, we would have very, very few fights. Because if you were telling the truth, as long as you tell the truth, the other party knows that you're telling the truth. They will be convinced. And you can only convince them when you tell the truth. Such a beautiful idea.
Sounds like magic a little bit.
Yes, that's zero knowledge magic.
Anish, I really enjoyed this conversation, and I really appreciate your taking so much time for me today.
Sure.
Thanks a lot for this conversation.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for joining us today. More info on our guests and our sponsors is in the show notes of this episode and on the podcast website, theblockchainandus.com. To help people find this podcast, it's important that you download, subscribe, and give it a top rating and review on iTunes or on the podcast platform of your choice. I'm Manuel Staggers, and I thank you very much for listening.